So that there is the clock tower. The university, when it sort of first built, sort of largely came in sort of one section, and they just keep building actually onto it. This is, I think, Max, I think is the guy back at the underbridge. There was architecture here, using a certain Gothic style, which as you look throughout Dunedin, you've got some, some fairly classic architecture. I mean, for a relatively modern town in terms of worldwide, we've got some great Gothic-based architecture, Edwardian, Victorian, and the work here is, it's still not necessarily all natures. It's maybe if you went to Europe, but it's still pretty impressive when you compare its contemporaries today, which look like they fell out of the East German Stasi. We're going to walk through this way. This is the sort of quad. Again, if you look at different universities around the world in the Ivy League, there's a set pattern that gets replicated. And as we sort of come into it, we'll get into very much of the area actually I want to kind of show you in a second. But the beginning of the whole sort of the university was, it was built around 4 core professions. And you have your medical up there, the Otago Crest itself, which you can get into the hill another day, and then of course that was all the medical block, and then you had the what would have been the, what was it, medical, oh god, brain fade, medical, geological, the 4 counters. Actually I know exactly where to go, but we'll just see that in a second. This is where we're actually really going to get things to get exciting. This is the Otago School of Mines. What the university really began with was as basically a trade, well, not even a trade school, was set up by the mining. Dunedin kind of came about built up on the back of the Otago gold rush fields. So mining was also the primary industry, and this is largely was the laying foundations for what built all of Dunedin, and it's basically, the streets were paved with gold. Otago School of Mines occupied the site from 1879 to 1986, and then the plaque that was here got disappeared, as does happen, and then got returned 20 years later. May 2006 was handed back to the Vice Chancellor. So initially, this was sort of the big part of the university. So thousands, tens of thousands of students would pour through here every year, and very much like when you go to the old art school in Dunedin, there's actually a really nice sort of kind of architectural schematics of the clock tower itself. But when you go through the Victorian, the Arts Centre, you always get that wonderful feeling of youth and hope, and that real sort of dead poet society of listening to what they're all saying to us, which I don't think, sadly, an orientation that really kind of goes into that enough. This is my little favourite little darling though. Up there we've got, and you get close-ups on the website, so if you can't see it, don't worry too much, is the Atlas. And over here you have the scholar with the delightful skull next to him. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because what that guy is actually holding in his hand is what they call a training board. It's part of, and same with the skull, it's part of the Masonic ritual, relates to what they call the chambers of reflection. Kind of taking the piss off in Harry Potter's becomes the chambers of horrors, but Rowling, I think, was making a real sort of dig at the whole kind of alumni of the old boys society. And up there, of course, here we have got our chaps there, the different scholars, gargoyles, which again, if you go around to Oxford University and Ivy League universities, you'll find these are actually very, very prolific. So you've got your doctors and you've got your geologists and the dentistry school, that's what it is. And there is one more, which I think is economics or law, medical, geology and dentistry. So they were the 4 foundations of the university. And that, of course, basically that character there is sort of talking about the numbers on the training board are sort of a reflection. I mean, there is a more esoterical level behind it, but really what they're talking about is knowledge is power, and all, knowing all the angles. Up here, of course, is the Atlas, and this manage of that knowledge allows them to dominate the world, which again is, of course, what reflects do out here about knowing all the angles. But knowledge is power. Old Terry Pratchett in his wonderful Discworld series, makes a parody there again on universities, the great unseen University of Ankh-Morpork, and it's talking about how we have virtually every major city. We have these universities. People walk past them and they kind of think, oh, how nice, but they never really understand actually how much these things actually contribute to the power base. Even up there and right next to Mr. Atlas there, you'll see the Owl of Minerva. Interesting little character, because you'll find that same sort of figurine on the Edmonds Clock Tower in Christchurch on Barbados Street. Thomas Edmonds, known for a short rise bakery, was heavily into the esoterics, and again I've got separate blogs basically about that and some of the very strange connections. Very important to mention here that, you know, when I operate my source material, I generally tend to work largely off the government's own archive material, so you know, I'm relying on pretty much mainstream official sources as you can, or I'm, you know, basically using archaeological material evidence like this, which you can then back up with academic sources. So they're the old Owl of Minerva. You know, and today it's quite interesting. We talk about this whole esoteric connection. That owl even turns up today when you've got the Otago Women's Law Society, and they make reference to that. And again, that's, you know, wasn't done accidental. Again, you look at things like we haven't managed to kind of get into Larnack's cemetery in the Northeast Cemetery, which is right over that way, where Larnack, one of the founding finances of Dunedin, was buried along with his son. Larnack shot himself, and somewhere about the 1960s and 1970s, the sons of the rich and privileged in Dunedin, a little group of them, decided to dig him up, and Peter Entwistle, who today writes the arts column, got into all sorts of trouble, managed to get off, of course, but that was because he actually had the Larnack skull in his own living room. I've seen photos of it as well, along with another group of them, little young guys. We won't necessarily go into details, that's not that important, but it was sort of referred to back then was the bones originally were sourced by a guy known as Dr. Voodoo. So again, you know, all this stuff isn't necessarily whether you believe it or, you know, that's the point, and I don't think they even believed it. It was about using it as a glue to kind of bring those little groups together that, you know, within them, that's where the power actually lay. And so, you know, that's pretty much all. Again, the sort of little gargoyles, and you've got the double column setters there here, which again is relating to that whole Freemasonry, lexicon, where you've got Boas, who's the column on one, which if you're in a Masonic lodge is what you'll find, and then the second column is Boa and Joa, so I might have got it back to front. They say that they don't know who actually, you know, was responsible for this, but again, when you look at my website, I think I pretty much managed to track down the stonemason behind this, and again, he was very much tied up with the Ravensbourne Masonic Murray Lodge number 5, which again we've got some great images there from their own, written by their own lodge brothers, with some great pictures in it, which we'll get into. And then it's just sort of walking through here, just kind of carry on the theme. This is David McLeod's sculpture, which is not necessarily tied into this, great artist, but what we hear is this checkerboard. Again, people walk over it, never paying attention, but again, this is, you know, very much a reflection of that whole masonry law, which just has seeped itself into the bones of the university. This is a crown. Somewhere there's spray painted into our land, their land. Our land is what David was telling me the other day. He was talking basically about how sort of this is the facade. You drive down the west coast, wonderful trees, and then you get behind it, it's just barren land as it's been largely exploited by these old powers. And again, you know, when you look at the stonemasonry, you know, you start to look into the guy there tied in with Fletcher's family. Again, one of these old boy networks. Very much tied up with the sort of secret Christchurch little blog, which mentions things like Thomas Edmondson and his wonderful esoterical clock towers. But it is very much worth it. Interesting today is just go and actually, you know, look up Fletcher's and then have a look at the shareholdings, and you kind of start to see some rather interesting names: Citibank, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. So again, these sort of core banking families that largely always controlled it. And then, you know, today again, you look at the university. You know, aside from being a place of knowledge, these guys own vast amounts of real estate network, and they really are shaping what actually happens in this city, Dunedin. Whether it's the stadium, which has, you know, created an over $1 billion worth of debt in Dunedin, at no doubt at some point the result of debt will see the sell-off of asset sales, which, no surprising, who will actually buy them. Today, what we're also seeing is this tactical urbanisation, which sort of permeates throughout Dunedin city. It's kind of a worldwide phenomena. Promoted as sustainability, but really it's about again that whole central and amalgamation of power. Again, you know, I picked on the Freemasons today, not because they are the be-all and the end-all. They're just a reflection of that natural core within our power structure for power to centralise into special interest groups, which then create their own little architectures and rituals, which sort of basically, you know, tighten the glue of that club, keep the outsiders in, and then there's a very interesting vetting process. We're going to try and get a little bit about, we're just about done for this section. There's one more thing I want to show you, which is the Albany staircase. Sometimes you get some really great results here. What I'm about to say was obvious. Some of the days you have to be, it's not so clear. So we'll see what the flowers are there today. If not, I'm sure I've got some images in my background which will kind of show you this reflective Masonic pissing on the tree thing that you'll find in Dunedin, which happens right under our noses and we don't really pay attention to it. And again, when we're sort of talking about the Masonic, I'm actually talking about that old boys network. So, you know, some of those people are actually Catholics, some of them are actually practicing Orthodox Jews. The actual ideology isn't really the important part of what I'm trying to say here. Now, unfortunately, because of what's happening here, you can't really get the majesty of this. But again, if you sort of see those two columns there, that's contemporary. It's been built into the kind of that old sort of base stone of the university. It's been built into the contemporary library. But again, that's Bowers on the left-hand side and Jacob on the right-hand side. If you go to the clock tower in Christchurch, you'll see that that's really rammed home. One point, you've got obviously Thomas Edmonds' structure there, which is a direct link into that whole Masonic law with things like, you know, the owl upon it, and there's very what I would call most blatant symbolism. Then it's got the Twin Towers sculpture, literally a bit of the Twin Towers on the third corner, and then it's marked by the two the two pillars sculptures which are left off the Barbados Wellesley church, which again, when you go inside the cafe, it's got all the photos of the original church and shows you how it was actually very much a backdrop for the interconnection of these power groups that would come together. So, interesting bit of sculpture there, which I won't go into because it's not relevant to what we're saying. But the university is an amazing place. You know, it's got all around. It's got these little symbolisms and imagery, which people walk past all the time and go, "Oh, isn't that pretty?" without really paying any thought about, you know, what was the original motivation for it being put there, who funded it, what's it really saying, basically about who actually runs the show. And again, I hammer this point home. You know, I picked on today the Freemasons because that was on the 1800s the kind of the dominant group that or vessel that served that role of being able to centralise and amalgamate power. However, it's changed and it's morphed throughout the years, but basically what you're talking about is that Illuminati, which makes sure the power stays in its own hand. You know, in Dunedin we talk about that, we call it the Tartan Mafia. This is actually basically, if you go down the other end of town, right next to, oddly enough, the Masonic Lodge there, the big main one there, right next to it, you've got what they call Dunedin House. And again, you sort of go through the door and there's the two silver ferns. So again, if you see my little post, Masonry Dunedin, again, shows you about this whole sort of little club that comes together, and they've got their own little rules and privileges, and we're not basically invited to participate in that. So, you know, it's sort of interesting how much it actually is in your face all the time. Most of us, of course, are just, you know, get up in the morning, we're just trying to earn a living to put food on the table. We don't really necessarily have a lot of time to think about this nature, but it is very much, these clubs, you know, are set up to actually protect each other's interests and safeguard, like, you know, Indians around the wagon. Over here it's got the Otago Museum, right there. Lots of really good stuff there. We might go for a walk around there one day because it's got some absolute gems of interesting bits about Dunedin that most people would not even ever be aware of. You've got the Radio 1 University radio show, which again, the academics within it very much have control over that and use it as a vehicle to push forward their own ideas. If you're part of the club, you'll be allowed to get to go ahead, and if you're not, then you'll slowly get weaned actually out. Beautiful city. We've got little wonderful green scooters, little antennas and whatnot that have popped up throughout the last lockdown as we get ready for the fourth industrial revolution of technology based on AI, which needs incredible amounts of infrastructure. just going to finally just take you to one last point, because to talk about Dunedin, at the moment we've got Aaron Hawkins as our current mayor, Benson Pope from Labour Party, very much part of this sort of that part of the Labour Party that sort of goes back to that whole those sort of Presbyterian old boys that were behind the academical face of Labour. That again, very much rooted in the status quo of academia. A lot of it in New Zealand, a lot of that was actually the ideas that we're talking about, the UN sustainability programs. The idea about smart cities was pushed out of the universities, and the main planning for bringing that into New Zealand was done in Dunedin at St Margaret's. They had a big fucking conference there, and let's just quickly walk you through. We've got 17 points of the UN sustainability program: no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable clean energy, decent work, economic growth, industry, innovation, infrastructure, reduce industry innovation infrastructure. Prior to COVID-19, the billions of dollars that were being borrowed from offshore banks like the JP Morgan and some of the people that are actually shareholders of people like Fletcher's that got themselves fingers firmly in the Christchurch rebuild pie. That was the buzzword they were using: reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, which is what Dunedin's all trying to be a role model city for. Response, consumption, production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions, and the 17 partnerships for the gold. All wonderful, wonderful ideals which we should all absolutely actively encourage, and that's what we need. It doesn't mean, something, there's no such thing as climate change. I don't really care. The planet's actually in trouble, and I'm sure all the things which we could do to actually alleviate the toxins and the pollutions would also resolve the issue of climate change. So it's an either, who cares what name you put on it. At the end of the day, if we're decent to the planet will be around for our children. The problem is, while that all sounds extremely wonderful and ideal, very few people really understand the structure of how that actually works. So that's what you're seeing there is the public face. That's what the UN sells to the public. It's the idea that's been promoted by very clever marketing people. Pretty much I had the original meetings in Davos, and that's where 1,700 Learjets flew in with an army of billionaires into an artificial city with air conditioning to discuss what we should do about gross consumption and climate change. I would have suggested they stay at home and have a Zoom conference, but there you are. So instead what they talked about was the investment opportunities behind those 17 ideas behind you. So then what happens next is, once you've got your public face sold to the public and it's been picked up on academics and all the people thinking this is a wonderful thing, this is the neoliberal habit of using that Trojan horse of presenting something which is something we should, no person that doesn't have a empathy or a moral conscience would oppose. The problem is that when you rip away the headlines, you start to look at the fine print, you run into issues. And in the UN situation, of course, what happens is that those policies, then having been sold to the public or promoters, this is what we're about, go to the executive bodies that actually make it actually happen. And what you're talking about there is things like the International Monetary Bank and the World Bank. And they turn around and get told, well, this is how, we're going to lend you the money to these programs, and that money doesn't come out of thin air. It's provided by the financiers of these programs, which comes from private business sectors. So you end up with JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, to name three, and of course other my favourites, people like Monsanto, DuPont. So in other words, some of the biggest, Coca-Cola, Nestle's, some of the biggest polluters and abusers of human rights and basically ecological vandals are in charge, or saying, well, we'll give you this money, but these are our conditions, and they wheedle themselves in, and thus a genuine environmental issue gets hijacked. So here we have our e-scooters, which of course made out of materials which are either ripped out of the ocean, not very ecologically sound, or stimulate rare conflict metals which use children. So again, really what you're talking about is the switch of one finite industry for another. And again, all this, you start to look into the politics and economics of smart cities. Sound wonderful on the surface, but then you find that you've got people like Stephen Jennings, the man who, as a treasury architect, basically brought about the privatisation of rail in New Zealand, and in the documentary Someone Else's Country, the documentary shows very much how Treasury, who gain acts in relation to these large vested interests, really have got their balls around the government. It doesn't matter if it's a Labour government or a national government. And if you're part of the crew and you've gone up through the different professional calls, as we saw the little gargoyle on the wall there, and you come from the right families and you say the right things, you'll do okay. However, if you start questioning it, then you become a heretic. Now, we're heading up there. This is the Albany staircase. That's obviously the Rob Roy Dairy, another famous, figure of Dunedin culture, which relates to Scottish Freemasonry overseas. And here you have a little flower bed, which, to be honest, I say it's 150 something or other, and I can't actually make it out. But sometimes you normally find that there's either a letter G there, a Masonic compass, or sometimes even a skull and crossbone. And again, the little shapes that you've got there is reflective of that esoterical pattern that we see throughout the universities and in our law buildings and any of the sort of the core structure that is the infrastructure of the power base that actually calls the shots. And we're just about done. If I'd had time, I would have gone, that's London Street up ahead on the right, I would have gone up there. And there's Elviston House, but there's also the house of the stonemason. I got a little bit of video there. I still want to come back and do some more in-depth work there. But again, you'll sort of see those connections very much established once you look at the hard, in-your-face evidence, which is, right in your face every day. This is another one of these great churches around Dunedin. Dunedin's got so many wonderful buildings and churches and architectures. But again, think about this. This is the turn of the century, 1800s. There's a church everywhere you go in New Zealand. Everybody goes to church on a Sunday. And if you don't, then you're some kind of evil heretic that scares people because you've got ideas which frighten them because they want to get along and be, part of the whole happy little bunch of monkeys. Just trying not to get myself killed here. And that was the norm. It was if you were a university professor or a scientist, or you went to church. It's what good little citizens did. Now today, we're moving into a new realm where we're told that science, see Kirkin the Tartan, see again the whole sort of Scottish influence. We're told that if you suggest that there's an issue with the climate change issues, or you're told you question the issue of big pharma, and those, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is these multi-billion companies that still come out of those four gargoyles that you saw on the clock tower, the law, the commerce, the geology, and basically big pharma. That is our new religion, and it's this idea of what science is actually becoming. It's becoming quite a dogmatic creature because, instead of being this sort of fluid where peer review, where everything's actually up for debate and things will move as we get more knowledge and input, it becomes rigid. Like, we must do it this way. We must wear masks. And as I said, it's not that masks don't work, but when you turn around and that no one's talking about the issue of cross-contamination or how done, worn incorrectly, they can actually be a spread of diseases, then you start realising that you're not actually getting science, you're getting something else. Anyway, I think that's my little picture of my Dunedin, how I tend to see things when I walk around town. We might actually get a chance. Yeah, we'll go a little bit further because there's one more thing I want to show you. And that's, you can just see over there is the Dunedin Hospital. The rebuild for that was going to be about 4 floors for that. In relation to the COVID now, they're talking about it being actually only having the money there for effectively 2 levels. Was sitting in a cafe the other day, hearing one person talking about, is it going to be great, all the jobs that it's going to bring? And the investment banker that was sitting with him turned around and said, I wouldn't count your shekels, because again, the economic consequences of this particular tragedy or event, we're not really having that discussion about how that's going to actually impact public health. So again, question is, are we getting science or are we getting the dogma? We've looking at various things like the Plan B, the way it's been presented to the media. Oh no, that's come from right-wingers. Not necessarily the case. Obviously the right-wings have latched onto a lot of dissatisfaction, which is the opportunism of that group, but the actual fundamental is about, as raised in the Guardian and the Economist articles, that science is not a hard, fast, this is what it is, it's actually something that must have a public discussion, was really the core point. And I'm just about try not to get myself killed again. Once we get past this vehicle, walks past, what I want you to look at is just those blue bicycle yellow dots, all about the whole idea that this whole area is going to be turned into one way, made way for pedestrians, because oil is evil, and we want it all to be everything running on electrical smart technology, owned by people like Lockheed Martin, which so ethical. And again, this sort of vote the planet, vote extinction animals, all incredibly good points, but not really looking at why it's been sold by some of the biggest polluters on the planet. These are the red and blue dots. Now, these were originally put forward as during COVID, as COVID relief. The idea was that they wanted to make it so that people could manage social distancing, cars would be slowed down because pedestrians were so important. The problem I had, and I just recently had the chief executive of Dunedin go, you're rubbish, about what I was saying, but my problem was that, first of all, you can go back to these polka dots and pop up in New York as part of the Rockefeller 1,000 Resilient Cities, which again is pushing this idea of mega smart cities. And they were pushed forward originally. They were originally sold to the public as a way to make the city a bit more attractive and vibrant. Well, that later changed, and we started to then find out, it's part of this thing which they call tactical innovation, and that was brought to New Zealand in Auckland in 2018. And then, of course, COVID came around, and the reason why it's been done changed again. And that's always makes me suspicious when public policies have to constantly change to be sold. Then you kind of question what really is going on. Over here it's got this whole everywhere since COVID-19, cameras are popping up, antennas everywhere for AI technology, AMT machines are closing down as we're going around. And these little yellow polka dots, which at the same time they were put in, if you go online and you look at the source I provide on related pages like I've done there with the art of mushroom farming, it explains that throughout New Zealand during COVID, and not just in New Zealand but throughout the world, there were aerial survey mappings going on where they were literally mapping everything to a finite, and that's all huge data which will then be fed into AI. And if you go to the LGNZ, which is the local government of New Zealand, which is a lobbying group, which is basically, it was a creature of Rogernomics. It's become a steering creature that sort of controls Dunedin. If you've got to be part of the club and you're all part of that in a corporate world, then you're in the club and you can steer the council where you actually fucking want it to go. Allow you wonderful infrastructure. So anyway, these surveys were going all around New Zealand. When we start to look into how they actually did it, one of the reasons though was the mapping the cities was that they require single points, which they're just a temporary thing. Which again, if you go back to when polka dots were first introduced in New York, they were never introduced as this is going to be stable. They were just a temporary thing, and you find that these back to the geospatial, that the temporary thing allows them to give points of reference by the reflective paint and road markings, which the LIDAR technology, which collects all this data, then uses. And of course, the slower something goes and the more something spaces, the more they can actually accurately manage and maintain that data. That actually, said I cite all the sources. This is what the chief executive was saying, no, that's all rubbish. Going, well, no, it's not, because actually here's the source showing you that this is how these policies unfolded. Here's the sources showing you this is what the survey aircrafts, and I can give you the serial numbers of the planes and the companies were doing. And then I can also go into the whole data about how geospatial mapping is very much a core of what they call the fourth industrial revolution, which in its heartbeat is basically about, again, that centralisation of power. So you've got your one side of your winners, which are your core professional classes, are made up again of that big pharma, law, commerce, and the ones that manage the raw resources, the Atlas and the Alchemists with this training board. And then there are the plebs. and we all got our wonderful little phones here in our pockets to make sure that we're all hardwired into the system, and everything we do is actually monitored and calculated to extract massive amounts of information, which Julian Carver, who ran the Open Ninjas before his death and incarceration in a psychiatric ward, no one knows why he died, but he made a very good point, and this is the man that did all the geospatial mapping during Christchurch. His motto was a photo makes a million, gives you a million words, and he says, geospatial mapping or data in the right hands gives us a wonderful way to actually provide genuine sustainability and improve our general walk of life for everybody. The problem that Julian Carver points out is that when you actually have this data and this information being done in a non-transparent fashion, and it's not accessible to the public, and the public's not been given the real reasons about why it's taking place, then you actually have a transfer of power in a very draconian fashion, which is incredibly dangerous, and unfortunately that's what's occurring. I mean, if I was to turn around and walk up the street today and say to anybody, these people walking around going about their business, what is geospatial mapping and how will it influence you, I doubt that I would be lucky to find 1 in 100 persons that would be aware that that's what's going on. So we're just about into the octagon. I think that's pretty much where we're going to call it a day. I'm ironically going to go to the cell phone place to get my evil golden jail anklet bracelet charged up. But if you were to go into the octagon, again, part of that design around that whole Scottish ye-old masonry of that influenced Dunedin at the beginning, when the good old boys came to Dunedin, knew there was gold, they wanted to make sure that they controlled all the natural resources, and good old Robbie Burns' statue was stuck in the middle of there as a man who today is right as this wonderful thinker, because that's what the average person in Dunedin likes to see themselves as. Dunedin is a thinking city, but again was very much climbed to that position of power because of the fact that he played part of the clubs, and that's why you see the wonderful pictures of Robbie Burns writing his poems for the law and knowledge, secret knowledge of Freemasonry, which is not secret. I mean, that's all piffle, but it just again reflects this fact that these icons and sculptures that go all around these statues, and up there you got another wonderful, little mini castle on the wall. The old, I think that's the Otago Girls' Skill actually. Again, if we want around there, we'll want around one there one day and check out some of the esoterics there. But it pretty much demonstrates you away from 18th century to the 21st century of how that power is being constantly kept to the cause. And unfortunately, modern technology is just going to allow and enhance that process. This has been Vision, and this is my little version of Secret Dunedin.